Joining us now, Tyler Houlton, Policy Press Secretary for the NRCC. That's the National Republican Congressional Committee. I used to work with them for purposes of full disclosure in a previous life when I was a member of Congress and a Republican member of Congress. And our good friend Rick Ungar, who tends to view things from the left side and from the other side of the aisle. Rick, of course, the political commentator for Forbes.com and the co-host of Steele and Ungar on Sirius XM Radio. Rick, to you first. You heard the pull quote from Politico. Is this bad news for Democrats in terms of congressional elections?
Well, look, I mean, I think it's kind of a non-story because I don't think you'd find too many people out there who would imagine that the Democrats have a chance of regaining the House of Representatives. They might pick up a seat here and there, or they might lose a seat here and there, but you're not going to see any massive change taking place there. This election is really going to be all about the Senate, and it's a lot of red states that are in the mix this cycle, and some very close elections. I think that's really the focus of the story.
And well, really, the story as well. It's almost. It's not surprising for those of us who have been through the political process in much the same way that we are engaged in public service. I'd like to think here in television news, we find out what is of interest to people and we talk about those subjects. So regardless of party label, obviously if there are concerns, both Democrats and Republicans are going to try to address those concerns, and yet there are some philosophical differences. Tyler, it'd be interesting to get your reaction. A Democrat who I know pretty well, in fact, his parents used to be my constituents, and I'd get very interesting letters from them. He is the chair of the DCCC, Steve Israel of New York. He says the election climate is still unfolding. Here's the quote from Congressman Israel. Quote, "You're going into a midterm election with voter revulsion named at Republicans." Well, now, it's interesting. I think usually, Tyler, there's widespread revulsion at Congress, the institution in general. Is it as strong against Republicans as Steve Israel claims? Tyler, to you, sir.
Well, Steve Israel is right. When you look at I think when you look at what Steve Israel said, he's right. The election climate is unfolding, and it's getting worse and worse for Democrats. Right now, you've seen President Obama's popularity rating hit all-time lows for his presidency, and he's tied to all these Democratic candidates. And you've seen, like you just mentioned, they're trying to sound like Republicans, but voters aren't going to buy that. And that's indicative of how popular President Obama is and House Democrats.
Well, let's go back to our friend Rick. Make your best case for a Democratic Congress, Rick, at this point in time. With Nancy Pelosi returning to the speakership, make the case for us.
Come on, JD, you give me some tough assignments, but I'm not sure I can pull that one off. It's not going to happen. Look, you never know what might happen between now and Election Day. You and I have been around long enough to see some crazy things take place. And, you know, Steve Israel's right when he says there is revulsion against the Republican members of the House. But you know what? What he left out is there's also revulsion against the Democratic members of the House. There's basically revulsion, period, because Congress won't do anything. The only case I could make is that if people would wake up out there and realize that the House has blocked any effort we've tried to make to get something moving forward in this country, maybe then they would figure out that we've got to make a pretty substantial change. But I wouldn't bet you a dinner on it, JD. I think you and I both know where this is going to end up.
And we need to get Tyler in on this, because if Rick is making that claim about the House, couldn't that same claim, Tyler, be made exponentially about the United States Senate under the leadership of Democrat Harry Reid as majority leader?
Yes, it can, because there's 40 jobs bills actually sitting in the Senate right now that have not been brought up for a vote. You want to talk about inaction? The House just passed a border security bill to try to deal with the humanitarian crisis at the border. Democrats overwhelmingly opposed it in the House, but it's sitting in the Senate again. So really what you're seeing is a Democrat-controlled Senate that refuses to do anything, and they're blocking bills that could go up to President Obama and be signed into law. So again, I think this is why people are so frustrated with President Obama and Democrats in Washington.
There is
Those
something.
are the kinds of arguments. Those are the kinds of arguments that would give the Democrats a chance. Look, people in this country aren't stupid. They understand very well what the bill was that the House passed to get out and get on the campaign trail. There's no bill that's realistic sitting in the Senate, and I don't know why you'd want to make that argument.
Because there are some of us,
Everybody-
Rick, who understand that you need not spend, quote, billions of dollars and empower
But I
illegals.
agree.
There
I
are other
agree.
things you can do in terms of security that are far more modest economically that
No
may be more
disagreement.
effective.
And no disagreement. You and I both know very well, we don't have to argue this, that was not the thrust of what the House passed. They passed two bills. They passed one that lowered the amount of money. Maybe they were right in doing that. You know what's interesting? Nobody's ever explained why they thought $600 million was the right number. But hey, maybe they had a good reason. But you and I both know that they put poison pills all over that thing to make sure it wasn't going anywhere so they'd have something to campaign on. When they get serious about leading in this country, then we'll get something done. Now,
You know,
do I
it's
think
interesting,
that their
Rick, it's
constituents out
interesting-
there are going to change? No.
Well, it's
I don't.
very interesting what you describe as poison pill. And Tyler, we'll let you get in on this. It was one of my frustrations because when Rick and what seems to be an echo chamber in the Washington press corps talks about, quote, poison pills in Republican legislation, seems to me they're exhibiting what could fairly be called, if not a double standard, then a willingness to always accept the debate on the terms of the left. Is that going
thought
to
I
be a
made up
problem
poison
heading into the midterms, Tyler?
No, I mean, here are the facts. This is a cop-out coming from Democrats saying that they're not, that it's all Republicans are blocking everything. Look, like I said, there are jobs bills after jobs bills we've passed to get this economy going again, and the Senate has failed to act, and the president's failing to lead. He's on vacation right now when Iraq is, we're having airstrikes in Iraq. This is why he's so unpopular and why the Democrats are running from the Democratic Party all across the country.
Well,
it's really as simple as that.
Speaking of that, there is something, and presidents of both parties have experienced it, the 6-year itch. Certainly the situation, the latest poll we're seeing from McClatchy newspapers shows the degree of difficulty Democrats may experience in November. The poll finds that 42% of respondents say they would vote for a Republican this fall, and it's based on their opinion of the president. And only 32% would vote for a Democrat. Now, Rick, we can talk about the rhythms and rhymes of history, but as you take a good step to critically analyze Republicans, or maybe rip the GOP in some cases, you have to admit there are some real liabilities the Democrats are facing electorally, courtesy of President Obama.
Well, it's actually interesting, and I want to go back for a quick second because I'm going to take some issue with what you said. I don't follow the rhythms of the left or anything the left or right has to say. I do my own research, JD. I don't do talking points, and all you have to do is read my column at Forbes.com, and you'll know I'm as tough on the left as I am on the right. So let's get that out of the way.
Well, it's not a
Secondly,
personal
the
attack.
McClatchy-
It's just pointing out what happens
Well, but
where the debate
it's
tends
just
to
not-
be
it's-
defined. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
But I'm the one who's talking, and that's not what I do. So as to the McClatchy thing, it's really kind of weird. You're absolutely right. When you look at the McClatchy summary of the poll, they absolutely say what you just said, that the president is dragging down Democratic candidates. But here's what's weird. I've got the poll right here. When you look at the breakdown of the different, whether it be Republicans, they ask, Democrats, independents, or what they call, deep independents, you see kind of a different story. Now, I believe that certainly the president is an issue in any midterm election, and he ain't helping the Democrats. But the poll's kind of weird because it doesn't really say that.
Well, we always can drill down with crosstabs. Unfortunately, that 4-letter word time is in our way. Tyler, to you in Washington, we thank you for your time and input. Rick, we will see you a little bit later as we continue discussion
I'm not
on
going
other
anywhere.
issues. We always invite that and appreciate that. And speaking of discussion and your opinion, we value it highly. Why don't you tweet us your comments on the upcoming midterms at Newsmax TV, #America's Forum. There's also Facebook.